Tennessee This Week from WATE's 6 on Your Side starts now.
Hello and welcome to Tennessee This Week. I'm Lori Tucker. We're glad you're with us. And this week we are joined by a familiar face and voice, Hancen Sale. Sale has been really one of our go-to experts on housing and was recently appointed to the Tennessee Housing Development Agency Board of Directors by Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally. So first of all, Hancen, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
I have to ask you, were you surprised to get that call?
A little bit surprised. I've known Lieutenant Governor McNally for quite a while now, but was pleasantly surprised, excited to give back to the state of Tennessee and on an issue that I care so much about.
Let's talk about what you're doing in this new role.
Yeah, so we oversee the board of THDA, the Tennessee Housing Development Agency. It's a relatively unique board and an agency of the state. It's the state's housing finance agency, and it's actually self-funded. It receives very little money from the state. It funds itself through its home loan programs for first-time home buyers, veterans, EMTs, all of those good things, works on the affordable housing and the rental space. So it's a really important agency that I think is very much overlooked in terms of its impact on the state.
Especially now.
Yeah, exactly. You know, these last few years, there's a housing crisis going on, and so the role that THDA has to play in that is really important. It plays a huge role. It helps expand access both to the home ownership side of the equation, but also, and crucially, to the rental side, where we're seeing on both ends of the spectrum a huge amount of pent-up demand.
Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit more about your new role. You're traveling all over the place. What is the goal with that? What are you doing when you travel to these different places?
So I travel for my personal work all over the place, you know, working in DC, working on policy, and then with THDA, we'll hope to listen to people, hear the issues, hear from developers, from nonprofit agencies about what challenges are they facing and how can THDA help address those as a supportive agency and sort of an arm of the state government.
All right, let's talk about some of the challenges that everyday folks are facing. You obviously have experience in the housing industry. People watching at home have seen you talking with us about the different changes and the challenges. How will you draw on your past experience with this new role?
Yeah, well, you know, I led the housing and economic research for East Tennessee Realtors for a better part of 4 years, and so I have a really acute understanding of sort of the data behind this. And so when you look at the broader trends, it's really troubling when you look at the age of a first-time home buyer. It used to be in the 80s that you were in your late 20s. Today, you're in your late 30s. That's 10 years of lost housing wealth that you would have had if you would have purchased a home at an earlier age. And, you know, in a balanced market, you look at the data today, the median household income should be enough for you to afford about 50% of the listings on the market. Today, it's 13%. So people are facing very real challenges.
It's upside down.
Yes, absolutely.
What do we do to fix that?
You know, at the end of the day, more supply is the answer. THDA has a role to play in the more supply side of the equation, but really it's also helping on the demand side. So helping first-time home buyers who can't really afford that conventional mortgage rate. You know, we offer lower mortgage rates by virtue of our structure, and that helps people get into homes. And importantly, it helps our Homes for Heroes program, helping people who are showing up to respond to our emergencies, who are taking care of us in the hospital. Those sorts of people, we're helping them get into homes with lower mortgage rates in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be able to.
In the meantime, you have all these people moving in. Let's talk numbers on that, because there have been droves of people coming in from California and other places. I've personally spoken with a lot of people coming in from California saying, we visited here, we thought, oh, this is the place to be. It's affordable, but that too is drawing on that housing supply.
Absolutely, and we're also a retirement destination, and that's a troubling problem in some ways. We want seniors to feel like Knoxville and East Tennessee is a good place to live, but it's also a problem. When they come in, they're adding to, a retiree adds to the labor demand. They go out to eat, they pick up their prescriptions, they go to the grocery store, but they're not adding to the labor market in terms of meeting the elevated demand. So there's all kinds of problems that are going on, although we are seeing this migration trend sort of slow down. I think the California craze is starting to come to an end. We're still certainly seeing people from California move here, but I think it's slowing down relative to what it was in the post-pandemic era.
We have finger annexations. I've talked to different city council members and county commission who are saying we want to try to find any area we can in which to build homes. How tough is it? There's a lot of land here, but you can't build on all of it. What do you tell folks?
Yeah, it's really challenging. And so I was having a conversation just this week about a rezoning that's sort of contentious. It's along a pretty major road, is right in walking distance from restaurants and schools. But a lot of neighbors don't want this development to happen. And, you know, it's understandable. They have real concerns. This is where they live, if they live in the surrounding area, you know, their home is their largest financial investment in most cases, so people have serious concerns. But at the end of the day, we sort of have to look at a broad level and say, what are the consequences if we don't build housing? And I would say the people who teach our kids, the people who come and take care of us in the hospital, the police officers who respond in circumstances in which we need them, they have to have somewhere to live. And ultimately, as we see housing supply dwindle and affordability deteriorate, where are they going to go? And our society, as I think the pandemic illustrated, can't function without these people.
You talking about the Choteau area?
Not that one,
but that is another one.
Yeah, they're all over the place. I mean, it's a really challenging political problem. I think we know what the answer is, and it's building more housing. Getting the community and residents on board with that is a whole different equation.
Without saying not in my backyard.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I've got to ask you this, how would proposed cuts impact your work and the work of the State Housing Board? The cuts around 40%, right? We're talking HUD? Yeah,
it's really hard to say that the budget reconciliation process that's in the news right now, it's still yet to conclude. The Senate is actively making changes as we speak. So what exactly comes out of that is hard to say, but really some of the core programs that make up some of the most important parts of HUD and then THDA's programs that are administered through THDA that come down from the federal level are going to be preserved, in my view. I think we're going to see a lot of those things preserved, but at the same time, there are some staffing cuts at HUD that will make the administration of some of these programs a little bit harder and a little bit slower. And ultimately, when it comes to housing, you need a roof over your head every night. And so any bit of speed that's taken away or any bit of delay in getting these programs administered has a real impact on everyday people.
What do you say to people who say, my rent is through the roof as well, but that's my only option right now? And there have been different schools of thought on, hey, are you throwing your money away? That's what it used to be. You're throwing your money away if you rent. Now it's like, well, maybe not. What do you tell folks who are stuck in that rut right now? Yeah,
well, if you look at the data, the wealth of individuals who are homeowners versus renters, 40 times the amount of wealth homeowners, it's 40 times that of renters. So there's certainly something going on there. Homeownership is a great way to build wealth, build equity in the long term, have something to be able to give to your kids. But, renting is also appropriate for certain people. It depends on, if you're going to move in the next year or two, what your financial circumstances are like. Renting versus owning, there are costs with owning in terms of upkeep and maintenance and that sort of thing. So it's really a personal decision. But, at the end of the day, if rents are very high, that hurts your ability to save for a down payment and ultimately buy a house if that's what you want to do. And so we have to address both sides of the equation. It's not an either or. We need a plethora of supply, both on the rental and the owner side. And right now that's still a challenge.
Yeah, it really is. And before we let you go, what do you mentioned long term. Long term, what do you want to see happen here in Tennessee?
Yeah, I want to see a future in Tennessee, in the state, in East Tennessee, where housing is accessible, abundant, and affordable. And at the end of the day, the best way to do that is to have a strong, growing economy. And to have a strong, growing economy, we need more housing. And part of that equation is having the political will to address solutions and to find solutions. And I would say and argue that the solutions we have, they're there. We know what they are. We need the political will to actually put them in place and solve this problem, because at the end of the day, if we don't have enough housing, we're not going to continue to grow. And to those who think that maybe we need to tamp down on growth, I would contend the only way to stop growth is to make your community undesirable. And I think everybody thinks that that's not a solution. So let's look towards the solution. Let's be optimistic. Let's build a future where there is housing for everybody across the income spectrum, because at the end of the day, if you want to thrive and have a prosperous economy, you've got to have the housing to house your workforce and to house the people that make your community home.
In a perfect world.
Yes,
All right.
exactly.
Hancen, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah,
we
great to be here.
appreciate it. All right, everyone, our panel of pundits is going to weigh in on the state of housing and more. Coming up next, stay with us. We're back in 90 seconds. Welcome back to Tennessee This Week. A moment ago, we heard from Hancen Sale, who was recently appointed to the Tennessee Housing Development Agency Board of Directors. Now I want to bring in our panel of pundits to unpack what he had to say about the current housing crisis. Joining us today, Courtney Piper, Craig Griffith, and Michael Covington. Always good to see all
Glad
of
to
you.
be here.
Thank you.
So let's go ahead and start with where things stand and how we can fix this problem. Which is a very simple question to a very complicated issue.
I think our guest, hit the nail on the head. It's a matter of supply. Right now there's not enough supply for the demand in the homes, and until that balance occurs again, you're going to see rising housing costs. And the demand is coming from both first-time homeowners, as he mentioned, and also from people coming into our area. So it's not a simple thing to fix. Now, and also he is working on the THDA board. And the THDA board has a very important program, the low income housing tax credits, that help create housing for low and very low income individuals in our state. And I'm understanding from what I read is that program is surviving the HUD budget cuts that you mentioned. There can be up to 44% cuts to the HUD program, which is significant, but this low-income housing tax credit program apparently is going to survive. In contrast to some other programs that THD is responsible for, having to do with housing vouchers and rental assistance, which could be zeroed out. So in the end, we'll have to see what the budget passes, what they have, and how THDA is going to implement the resources that they still have.
A lot of people depending on that and searching in limbo right now, needing a good place to live and just simply can't afford it.
I cannot believe how much housing has gone up in Knoxville. I remember I was 26 when I bought my first home in North Hills. My budget was $100,000 and I ended up paying $106,000 and I thought I got hosed and I thought it was the end of the world. And now, just in the last year, looking at that house that was the size of mine, which was just under 1,100 square foot, some of those same houses in North Hills are going for $250,000.
It's mind-boggling.
It is absolutely insane. And I look at myself at 26 years old trying to buy a house for $250,000. There would have been no way I would have had to continue to rent. So it is certainly a challenge that we need to continue to focus on. And you all also talked about that sometimes there's neighborhood objection to low-income housing. I don't know if it's necessarily the objection to the housing as to what it looks like and feels like. So if there is a concentrated effort to make new housing projects, whether it's a subdivision or whether it's low-income housing, blend into the character of the neighborhood, which I know developers aren't going to like because they've got to make their subdivisions and their housing look like the rest of the neighborhood, I think there could be less objection to
and
these
keep the
housing
cost
units.
down,
Correct.
which is tough to do.
Correct. Well, and a lot of these new house developments, whether you're talking about a house that's $250,000 or $100,000, they're just not built to last like my very sturdy 1956 brick rancher in Holston Hills.
Right.
So
you're right. You can't argue with that. Michael.
Affordable housing is a misnomer. Affordable houses are cheap houses. Affordable houses are resided in by people who do not have an investment in that property. Cheap house, low investment in terms of the inhabitant, those houses are going to be vacant as soon as better jobs, higher paying jobs in areas where housing is cheaper. Those people are going to pack their bags, they're going to leave Knoxville, and they are not going to look back. They have no investment in
Can they afford to do that, though?
Yes, they will absolutely be able to afford that because they'll bankroll just enough money to make the move. They're going to a higher, better paying job, or they're going back to the home that they were in before they needed to move to Knoxville. What I'm trying to get the powers that be to understand is you will never build enough, quote unquote, affordable houses. You're just going to build a ton of cheap houses that are going to be uninhabited as soon as the folks who are in them find a better place to be. And so we just need to slow down the building of all these cheap houses because we will never house everyone that needs a house. They will need to make the decisions for themselves that enable them to live and sustain themselves.
But
I
once you
certainly would
establish
disagree
a
that
price line, you're not
these
coming down.
These houses aren't cheap. They aren't meant
They
to
are.
turn over as
Sure
quick
they
as
are.
that.
And we can go to any one of them and we will see the materials are cheap and the laborers are not well qualified.
Well,
And I know this for a fact.
I think that if you go through the history of Knoxville and you talk about, Courtney and her house that she bought in '56, they were well made. They've survived the
didn't buy
test
it in
of time.
56.
I didn't buy it.
Well,
It
it was
was
built in
made.
50, or a '56 house, like her '56 Chevy.
I know what you mean.
2025 houses are not being built with the same quality.
They don't have the good, strong bones perhaps across the board, but there are still good homes.
And
being
Courtney
built.
was a responsible resident in that house. She cared for that house until she sold it to someone else. Someone that is renting, problematic. And oh, by the way, these housing developments that are lease only, that does not encourage home ownership. When those folks get in those houses, they will hardly ever be able to save enough money to get out and buy their own home.
And I'll agree with that. One of the main issues we have facing housing is the fact that they're rental property.
Yes.
And the people that are renting them from aren't in them for the long term. And we need to limit the amount of rental property we have in neighborhoods so that they don't become transitional neighborhoods that decline when people move out. So there's legislation that you can approve that will help with that and help address. And it's not that we're trying to house everyone. I don't think anyone has that concept. What we're trying to do is provide a decent, affordable home, be that an apartment, be that a house, for people to live in. And we're seeing a much greater building of apartments right now than we are single-family homes. So that trend is going to be here for a long time.
And I remember when I moved here, there weren't apartments. There
Right.
were no apartments
Right.
for anyone.
When we were talking the last time about this, and I mentioned to Courtney that she could go off of Magnolia, somewhere near Pizza Palace, and she would see a lot of this cheap housing development going on. They have built an apartment behind that Pizza Palace area. It is so large, you cannot see the next street. For 20 years, I've been able to look over and see the next street. Now there's an apartment dwelling there where the homeless hang out at the base. That dwelling is not going to sustain itself the way it's built. It'll be built in 2 months.
But
That's going to be
Michael,
empty housing.
I think what you're talking about can be resolved via codes, right?
Yes.
That's a codes
But look how
issue.
many challenges we have in changing code.
Well, Michael,
and adhering to
let's
them.
just get it done.
Well, we continue to get it done, but we don't want to adhere to the changes. That's what the county is having to deal with now. Let's do what the original housing plan was designed to do, and we're reluctant to do that.
Well, let's also look at Cumberland Avenue. Cumberland Avenue used to be the Strip, and now it's the Canyon. Because they've
Yeah.
built all these high-rise apartment buildings there to address the student demand. And I have some of the same questions Michael does in terms of how well those were built, how long they'll survive.
Right.
Will they survive student ownership? So, it's an issue that has to be dealt with through, as Courtney says, strong zoning codes.
How bad is the problem here compared to other parts of the country?
No,
I
it's-
feel like
it's the
everybody's
same.
suffering the
Yes.
same thing right now.
It's the same. I went the little home that I grew up in Miami. When we traveled through Miami a couple of weeks ago, I looked up our house, that my grandparents built for $45,000. Last January, it sold for $4.2 million. So, it's everywhere. And the solutions are going to be different in each community. So you'll have to figure out how to address those affordable housing concerns in a different way in each community.
We're almost out of time for this segment, but what's the best answer here? What would you like to see happen?
Well, for me, it's the apartments. It's getting that immediate supply of housing available. And then it's much more difficult because we have very little land to build. Certainly in the city, there's very little land to build single-family homes on anymore. And of course, there's a battle across the country. Should single-family homes on an acre lot be banned? Because it's very difficult to increase your housing stock if you have those sorts of zoning requirements in going on. So.
And a lot of homes in Knoxville have just that. That's kind of how it all started. Courtney, what about you?
Yeah, Lori, I do not have any good answers for the challenge that we're facing. But I do have a lot of nostalgia, which is not helpful. For my situation, when I was 26, then I was able to buy a really great home with character, and I just don't feel like that opportunity is in reach for a 26-year-old in 2025.
Yeah. very quickly.
Natural residential attrition will solve some of this. Some people are going to pack up and move to areas they can afford to live in. Knoxville is very inviting, but Knoxville is an expensive place to live. More expensive than it was when Courtney was buying her first home. We've got to deal with the affordability of Knoxville, or the attractiveness of it, drawing people in from all over the country. I can understand why people want to come to Knoxville. I can, but we can't sustain them all. We just can't.
All right, we'll leave it at
can
that.
Or can
Everyone,
we?
it's time to take a break here. Coming up on Tennessee this week, we are going to discuss President Trump's decision to fire another TVA board member. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Tennessee this week. Another TVA board member, as we've reported, has been removed at the direction of President Donald Trump. Beth Geer was nominated to serve on the TVA board by former President Joe Biden. A filing obtained by 6 News shows her appointment ended on Tuesday. Right now, the TVA board only has 3 members. Not enough to form a quorum, of course. The TVA board has not had a quorum since late March, when President Trump fired Michelle Moore. You also may recall that the president fired then board chair Joe Rich. So let's bring back our panel of pundits to talk about this latest development. What can TVA do at this point when it comes to the board?
They can't do anything because they don't have a quorum.
Yep.
And this latest firing is incredibly frustrating because we're moving in the wrong direction. There doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency to have a fully functioning board for the nation's largest public power provider. This administration wants the United States of America to lead in energy dominance and to lead a nuclear renaissance for the entire world. And we cannot do that unless our nation's largest public power provider has a fully functioning board, so they can pass a budget and they can make investment decisions on these kinds of projects that will get us to where we want to be in terms of energy dominance, reliance, and resiliency. And so it just does not seem like we are trending in the right direction by removing more board members instead of aggressively pushing forward nominations from the White House and then confirmations through the Senate.
What about you, Craig?
I'm not exactly sure what the administration is trying to do. Yes, the TVA board now has no quorum, so they can't take action. But in other places around the country, the administration is forcing utilities to leave coal-fired and gas-fired plants open past their dates of retirement that had been previously announced. So you can't take those actions with TVA. There's a number of coal plants that are being retired because you have no alternative to develop that source of power. So there's definitely mixed signals coming from the administration on what direction they want to take. Now, I think the direction the president wants to take is dig, 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 drill, 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 and do more fossil fuels, whereas I think the country is moving in the opposite direction. There are more jobs now in renewable energy sources than there are in coal mining. So the direction the country is moving in is renewables, whereas he wants to move into the old fossil fuel.
Michael?
One of the things that I absolutely love about this area is that this is God's football country. And in football, misdirection, trick plays, gadget plays are all the rage. The president is playing a long game with TVA. He's extracting one board member after another. He's taking his time. He sees no rush to fill that board with board members. And he's probably looking for board members right now. But in the meantime, TVA continues to function. They have their roster of projects that they're working on, and there is no prohibition on any of that. So what the president is doing is seizing control, and he's doing it over time, and people don't like that because they like to see immediate response to a need. There is no need for an immediate response. When I flip the switch, KUB is able to provide me with power because TVA is functioning. When the president gets the board he wants, the president is going to push TVA to do the things he wants done. We might not agree with that, but the president is going to get what he wants.
And the problem with that is that TVA is a federal entity. I believe they are on the federal government's budget timeline. So yeah, they have a budget that they've already approved, but come October 1st, They need a new budget in order to function. And if we want to continue to attract economic development to our region, we need to put more power on the grid. And the only way we can put more power on the grid is if TVA has a board where they can approve new construction, new power purchase agreements, and new programs that enable getting more power on the grid.
And we're almost out of time, but doesn't this cause uncertainty among the American
Yes.
people seeing
Yes.
what's going on?
And a football game, misdirection, a football game is only 60 minutes long. These issues that we're dealing with are multi-billion-dollar decisions that
Almost out of
take
time.
years to come to fruition. So it's not as easy as a football game alignment.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Once again, this has flown by. We appreciate the fact that you were with us today. Have a good one.
The views of guests on Tennessee This Week are their own and do not represent the views of WATE 6 on your side or Nexstar Broadcasting.